Hello and welcome to Turning Point Tactics, the competitive Killteam 40k podcast, focused on giving you the strategies and tactics to seize initiative every turning point. I'm your host Ryan, and I'm joined by the Angron to my Lehman Russ, Connor. How are you doing this evening, Connor?
I'm good, thanks, Ryan. And like a teenager on his Duke of Edinburgh cadence lesson, I'm looking forward to learning about the scouting step today. Are you?
Yeah, I mean that's good segue into scouting, because obviously that's the next step in the match play mission sequence, which we're trying to get through. So we can then move on to bigger and better things. We start talking about various faction specifics and turning point specifics and other tactical tips as well. But sticking with the theme of the match play mission sequence, we are at the scouting step, which is the last bit where you can do a little bit, I think, of psychology to get in your opponent's head and use it as a way to get a favourable outcome going into turning point 2 as well as turning point 1. So I've got together a few key points that I think is probably worth going through, and then we can talk about some of the stuff that's happened over the course of the week. If that sounds good to you, Connor?
Does sound good. Let's crack on.
Sweet. So obviously the first thing about the scouting step, which everyone should be fairly aware of, is it's used to determine initiative, right? And the standard rule of thumb when you're doing or when you're playing Kill Team is at turning point 1, you want to deploy in such a way where that your opponent having initiative doesn't matter. So you're not at risk of being alpha struck or anything like that. Now there is a few exceptions to this, but the standard competitive rule, if you're going into a game, is if you win the scouting step and you draw the card that says that you get to choose, you should be giving your opponent initiative on turning point 1, so that when you go into turning point 2, you have a 58% chance to then get initiative, where it's much more likely to be crucial with the positioning of models and threats and that sort of stuff for you to be able to do stuff and to be more effective in turning point 2. So the general advice would be when determining initiative, deploy in such a way where it doesn't matter, and therefore you can give your opponent that initiative. So how do you determine what is likely going to be that's going to give you that opportunity to do that, right? So what do you want to look at on the board to try and see what move do I need to do to make my opponent take that so I can then get initiative or force them to have initiative, so to speak. So I think you need to look at your opponent's team and analyse it based on the special rules that they have, right? So if you look at their team and they are all on conceal, to me that says that they are likely to take infiltrate as an option, because if they don't take infiltrate as an option, then turn 1, they have no threats and no ability to hurt you, and you have basically free reign on ball control, but they have to be cagey and hold back from you. So first look at their operatives. How many operatives do they have on engage? How many operatives do they have on conceal? Where are those operatives positioned? That sort of stuff. So if they have none on that engage order, it's probably a safe bet that they're going for an infiltrate. If you see that they have a model that's way in the open, but let's say 3 inches away from a bit of cover, and that they don't have a special rule like into the breach for vet guard or for orcs or something like that, you can go, well, in that instance, I know that they're probably going to be taking dash because they're going to make use of that to try and get them forwards and do that, and that you can understand that one as well. And finally, for fortify, maybe they've positioned a sniper in a way which you think they're likely going to be to try and move up onto a point turn 1, or they've got that silent weapon in some way you think the only way that they're going to be able to use that is by sticking down a fortify option in a certain place. So the other way that you might see that telegraphed potentially is if they have quite a few people on engage, like to the point where you think there's no reason why they'd want to be taking infiltrate because they already have enough and there's no one that's set to be moving forward anywhere. Well, then potentially that's going to be quite an obvious way for them to say, okay, well, I'm using the fortify. That's their plan, and they already have the models that they want to be able to get around that. So in that scenario, fortify is going to beat infiltrate. Infiltrate is going to be beating recon, and recon's going to beat fortify, and that's kind of like the way in which it goes through. So looking at that on the reverse side as well, your opponents are going to be doing the same mind game when they're looking at what you're doing and how you're playing. And I think it's worthwhile just thinking to yourself, okay, so if my opponent is hoping to force me to go first or whatever, then in this instance, I want to make sure that I'm not telegraphing myself so that they don't know which one to choose. So maybe that means that you go with having one model on engage during the first turn, so that you could do either fortify or a dash or whatever, and they're not really too sure which one to guess. and that helps give your opponent or keep your opponent guessing and makes them do an option that's not necessarily a guaranteed outcome, so that they're a bit risky when they do it, or they take an option which is less favourable to them as a player. So that's kind of like the first thing, and that's the core bit is it's used to determine initiative, and we should make sure that when we're doing our actions, we're using it in that way to make sure that the right player at the right time has initiative, right? So there are some deviations in the new match play mission sequence or the core missions where I think actually taking initiative yourself is probably the better option than, say, giving it to your opponent. And the examples I'll give are in the loot mission and in a mirror match. If you're a 2 APL team or a 3 APL team and you're in a mirror match against the same as you and you're playing capture, secure, that might be a good example of when to use or when to take initiative initially, right? So let's say, perfect example, you're playing loot and you're playing against Vet Guard, right? And they have models that are in the midboard that you know are going to dash forward into a place that's hiding, and turn one, they're going to group activate 2 and take 2 of the middle loot points and immediately force you from turn 1 with their first activation into a 4-2 on primary for that turn, because they're going to easily capture the ones that are safe at the back, but take the middle ones which you want to have, but you're then not able to deny them that. So that might be an opportunity for you to be able to, say, throw a model out first activation onto one of those points and contest it, so they can't then move on there and take that point from you. And that then means that you're going to be on a 3-3, or if you have your own GA2, potentially then you could move forwards and take those points or contest both of those points, so that they can't necessarily get that 4-2 swing that they want, and maybe it heads more towards a 4-2 swing in your favour instead. So that's kind of like a reason why you might want to avoid take or giving your opponent initiative in that specific mission against that sort of specific opponent on turn 1. And the other one I talk about is like a 2 APL team mirror. So if they have an ability to get onto a point and capture it, let's say they have a free mission action and they can get there, they can capture it, but then you're having to commit 2 models onto that point to be able to take it back, that could be really inefficient for you going forward. So that's kind of like the deviation from initiative as normal. Does that kind of make sense, Claudia? Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I really liked it. One thing I want to just pick your brain on. So I like the way you were talking about mitigating telegraphs. Is there should you ever be wary of a feint? So what I'm thinking of is people redeploying, so like Phobos or I think Corsairs can do it, or even someone like Pathfinders could put their model in the open, but they get a free recon dash, so they might not choose that. They might choose a different option. Do you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, absolutely. And the classic baits can be set there, which is a really good point, and it's something that you should always be aware of. So the other one that people can do quite commonly is they'll have a medic within range of the guy that you're going to shoot. So you'll then try and do a big alpha strike moment, kill that model, and you think you're going to get yourself an advantage straight away. They get medic revived, or whatever happens. They blinding aura if they're novitiates, or they dash to safety during the strategic phase, and suddenly you've taken initiative, and actually that's been taken away from you. So 100%, you got to be aware of those mind tricks that your opponent might be trying to play on you as well. So always ask yourself, has my opponent actually made a mistake there, or have they just put a model out and it's there for a reason? It's going to be moved away, and you're not going to get that opportunity to hit it where you want to straight away potentially. So I think that's something to be very cognizant of going into the scouting step. There's a few other points though that I just want to touch on, because I think it's all about this, and it's quite relevant, and it's going to affect pretty much the whole of the game going forward. So everyone always talks about activation advantage. I just want to sort of explain to people a little bit of how with the scouting step you're changing how that works, right? So if you both have a 10-man team, but you force your opponent to go first, well, that means that you're going to get the last activation of that turn. And that's really important for you to then know that you could potentially, if you're playing the capture mission, which is just, rather than secure, it's just the one where you just need to have APL on an objective at the end of the turn. And let's say one of those objectives is quite exposed and it's in the open and no one wants to go there. Well, potentially you can then have that last movement where you're going to move a guy onto it, but before your opponent can do anything, react to it, the turn's over, and you're going to get that VP and it's safe and it's yours, and then they can even move off the next turn and then go and do more damage going forward. So that's a point there where it's understanding how the activation advantage works is quite important. And you see this happen all the time in games like it's particularly like an elite versus elite matchup where you have that 6 models versus 6 models, because being able to position your guy with the plasma pistol as your last model in the right place to maybe guarantee a double kill going into turn 2 or something like that, or apply a lot of pressure onto your opponent with the fact that you have a 58% chance to win that initiative roll, that can be really significant going into that turn 2. So you're more likely to win initiative, and when you position in a better place to be able to make more advantage of initiative when you have it, and suddenly you're starting turn 2 in a much more offensive manner. But that activation advantage, that applies the whole way through the turn, right? So some models are locked to GA2 and they have to use their GA2, and some models aren't. So for instance, you have like the Confidant in Vet Guard can GA2 people, Breaches can do it as well. But sometimes it's worthwhile not using that ability so that you maintain that activation advantage. And what we're talking about there is that that's how many activations you have once your opponent has finished all of theirs, and then you get to do all of yours, right? So it can be a really sizable amount. So it could be up to say like 5 or maybe even 6 if you've played it in the right way, or it might be as little as 1 or 2. But you can play with that with the scouting step and just mean that you have a better chance of getting it through. Any thoughts on activation advantage?
Yeah, it's a very important part of the game, I think, particularly when you combine it with that initiative advantage. If you know what I mean, that extra 58% chance of winning initiative turning point 2. But what I would say is, coming from a very aggressive player, as you know, is it's not guaranteed initiative turn point 2. So it's still important to consider what might happen if I lose initiative. You're giving yourself the best odds because you've got 58% chance of winning that initiative, but don't overextend yourself and lose that initiative roll, which is a 42% chance, and then throw the whole game because you lost it.
Oh, absolutely. And like, we'll talk about my tournament the weekend, but that was one of the games where I couldn't get initiative on a single turning point. And had it would have worked out significantly. And on those things, I was winning on draws, and I had the Star Striders reroll, and I still couldn't get initiative. So it's very much one of those scenarios where you can't guarantee it, but it's worth trying at times to make use of it. There's another point as well, which I think is worth talking about because it's also related to this, is when would be a good opportunity to take initiative might be if you see a really good Alpha Strike opportunity. Generically, I'm not too fond of like a high risk, high reward play, because I think that the higher the risk it is, generally I always think that it's going to go wrong for me on tournament day. So it has to have a really good tactical payoff for me to think to myself, I'm going to accept that risk right now, because the tactical payoff that I'm going to get is going to be so significant that it's worthwhile. So maybe that's something along the lines of moving a guy out into light cover, where then I can get a privateer asset strike into a huge cluster of models, something like that, right? Like if I can do that, I think to myself, this is worth me losing the activation advantage, because if I killed 3 or 4 of their models that haven't yet activated, suddenly, boom, I've got the activation advantage back just because that single actors has achieved what I wanted it to do. So that's another thing there. But be aware that if you're setting yourself up for an Alpha Strike and it seems somewhat obvious, then your opponent might try and do the same thing to you. So they might decide, well, you look like you're trying to get initiative to do this Alpha Strike, so I'm going to do something that's going to give me initiative, and then as a result, I'm then going to kill the model that you want to Alpha Strike with. So just be aware of how you do that. So if you see a model like an example might be like a Pathfinder Grenadier, he's on engage, he's on the flank, they've taken a dash during the scouting step because they're then going to combine it with their strategic phase dash, and they're trying to like yeet this model on engage all the way up there to be able to get an EMP into your back line. Well, maybe you can use your sequence of moves to be able to go, well, if I play Fortify, I'm going to beat their Infiltrate option, whatever it is that they decide to play, and their free dash from the recon drone is now kind of relevant, and suddenly you're able to swing your plasma out and shoot their whoever it is, assault grenadier turn one before they get a chance. So that's how you can use it potentially to deny those alpha strikes.
You might not even be able to get a shot off because it might be obscure, but perhaps you've got something like the Void Dancer's ability to the psychic power to just stop them being able to use that turn one for their alpha strike, and it's too late then. Well, I think Phobos have got something similar as well.
Yeah, the Omniscramma from Phobos is a perfect example where if you telegraph it too much, they will just go, yep, that person can't activate for up to, say, 5 turns. And suddenly, they get to move almost their entire team before you get to do the supposed alpha strike that's coming in. And in that case, it's probably going to be pretty bad for you. And I'd be surprised if that alpha strike model survives. So that's a point with all of this is, yes, it's good for a certain reason. Just be careful how you telegraph it, because if you're telegraphing it in a way which can be really easily predicted, then it's going to be easily countered as well when you get to those higher tables. Finally, I think I just want to look at the 3 main options and some sort of discussion around it, because I think it's worth doing. So we'll start with Fortify, because it's probably the biggest part of the discussion. Obviously, it's the first option that you have, number 1. So at the moment, clearly, if you're really online or you're in the Discords or you're chatting in your local metas and whatever else, you're probably hearing a lot about the fact that Fortify can be put on a vantage point to give you a really effective sniper platform or something similar to that. And that is true. It can do that. And that is a good option, potentially, on your matchup to be able to use it. But I think people are often overlooking the other option that is there with the Fortify step. So the fact that you're not limited to deploying it within 6 inches of your drop zone, instead, you can do it anywhere in your territory, adds a massive level to what the flexibility that you can have with that. So sure, you can place it very, very close to your drop zone so you can get a sniper up, or, and this is what I've been doing recently, I've been placing it on the far side of objectives that are usually just outside of my 6 inches, so that my opponent can't move on to them turn 1. And this is where I sort of said about how you can play around like the loot missions and the secure mission to try and make it harder for your opponent to be able to get there, is by placing those barricades on those objectives, so that there's no way that your opponent can actually reach or put their base on it, because the barricade's in the way, so they have to go around the barricade. Well, now they might not have the movement to achieve it. So we talked about when we deploy models how we're going to perfectly measure out distances to make sure that we don't move block ourselves and we're able to get to the right place at the right time. Well, maybe by you placing a barricade in a certain place, well, actually they're not doing that anymore. So you've scuppered that plan immediately just through barricade placement. And that's kind of like an entire sub-game itself, is how can you restrict your opponent's movement around the board in a way that favours you and really punishes them. And I think people are just oversimplifying it and just looking purely at the ability to get a sniper nest that might not necessarily give you everything that you're hoping for. A great example, last weekend when I was playing Blooded, I was playing against Gene Stealers and I used a double barricade setup. So I had one right at the back of the objective and one right at the front of the objective. So you have to be more than 2 inches apart, but that is achievable if you space them out in that way. And then effectively, the Gene Stealer has to pay almost a double traverse to be able to get to you. And that's really hard to do from any sort of safe distance away to be able to get a charge in. So he was then unable to charge my guys on the objective, and the Gene Stealer's killing power really is on charging, and then they can't get within 2 to be able to flame you because they're going to get to that first barricade, and then it's not close enough. So that's like a sort of a mega barricade objective blocking tactic that you can use, which you're not going to get the most out of if you purely just put barricades down on your own terrain as sniper platforms. Any thoughts on barricades, Connor?
No, but I would just reiterate, it is a nice point. I think everyone's been very fixated on this silent sniper vantage point idea, which is a solid idea, but perhaps there's other very powerful options that you could also be exploiting that will bring you more utility throughout the game, because you do get to deploy it anywhere within your territory. That's worth remembering.
Absolutely. And the next one, obviously, is the Infiltrate. So that's the ability to change someone either from conceal to engage, or from engage to conceal during the first turning point. And the latter is quite important. People forget that you can use it both ways, right? And that's quite important for elite teams. I'll talk about in a second. But Kloshri mentioned this during his tactical tips that you can find on our previous episodes when we talked about his tournament in Warhammer World, and the importance of having that ability with your indirect weapons. So you can have a guy that's on conceal quite far, or positioned quite far forwards with an indirect weapon that suddenly you can give them that order flip, and they can suddenly move up, throw a grenade, and has quite a long threat range to be able to punish people with should they use it. So that's what that's giving you. But that gives you that potentially on any model anywhere. So you might have a melee model that's in a position, and suddenly, actually that has to be respected because he can flip to engage, charge me, and fight me, etc., etc. So it really helps to keep your opponent guessing as to where you're going to be going and what you're going to be doing and how they're going to respect you with it as well. Now, for elite players, I sort of talked about just then, touching on it's not just from conceal to engage, but also from engage to conceal. So when I played against Derek the other day, he made sort of a great point of I find it really hard on turning point 1 to be able to position everyone that I want to in a certain way, and the only way I can find that I can get good positioning is through using the conceal mechanics. And I'm like, that is absolutely correct. That is how the game works. It's usually a trade, right? You're either on engage and doing stuff, or you're positioning with conceal. So he was taking everyone on conceal and then taking the infiltrate option, but sometimes not using it. But that then meant that I knew that he was going to take infiltrate because he had telegraphed what he was going to take by having all his models on conceal, right? So immediately I'm like, well, he's obviously taking infiltrate, and therefore I'm going to take fortified to give him initiative, and that's going to give me a better chance turning point 2 to do more damage, which it did in the end. So in that scenario, what I recommend instead is he could have put his gunner on engage, and then I would not know. I thought maybe he's going to live with just having one, and then maybe he's going to go for that fortify option, and I'm going to have to go for a dash maybe to guarantee it or whatever, and it just makes that choice for me a little bit harder going through the game. And then during that turn, his last option could be his gunner, and he goes, you know what? No valid targets are presenting themselves. I'm not getting anything out of this guy, but I really want to position myself somewhere where I'm going to do some damage next turn. And boom, flips conceal, moves him into that position that he wants to be able to go 9 inches away or 10 inches away because he's rapid. And boom, that's it. Suddenly he's set for turn 2. He's got all the models in the right place. And there wasn't really a penalty for him because he was able to do so with that order flip. Any thoughts on the infiltrate option, Connor? Because obviously with Pathfinders you use it quite a lot with those sneaky gun drones and that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, so pre-data slate, this was just my go-to option. So I mean, with any team, but particularly with Pathfinders, because your forward deployed gun drone is forced to be on conceal, but then the fact that could then flip into engage and then get overwatched again by the drone controller just made like a nightmare model for your opponent to deal with. And I still think it's a very solid option. It's just, it puts a lot of mental strain on your opponent, the fact that anybody could be a threat and all your models can be in safe, heavy cover, out of line of sight. It stops it just by having an infiltrate. It stops your opponent doing what they want to do. You're mucking up their plan, and they don't want to push forward onto objectives.
And the gun drone is so good for that. I often view him as a little assassin because he can just go in, he moves with a APL buff from a comms, whatever. He's got fly. He's moving 9 inches, getting within 2 of someone, and the relentless guns are just so effective. Particularly if you have
Especially
the drone controller as
lights.
well. Marker lights. So he's ignoring cover. He's within 2 anyway, but he's got that relentless. He's hitting on 3s, and then you can then overwatch him and hit on 4s. Oh, it's gross. So yeah, that is a real threat that people have to be aware of, and a real punishment if they don't take that infiltrate option, because that's something they immediately lose, right? So something to be aware of when you're playing against Pathfinders. They probably want that as an ability. Finally, the last option is obviously the free dash recon option, and I think with this one, this is probably the least taken of all of the options, I think, and the only time I've seen it taken really is used to counter fortify and try and get initiative. That's generally how I've seen it taken, and it's usually used in pairing with the fortify options. Try and get a sniper nest turn 1 with someone set like Vetgar when they can resolve 2 options. Okay, so what do I think about this one? I think you have to really look at what a dash is going to give you, right? So if that dash, and going back to sort of loot as a discussion point, if that dash is going to give you the ability to loot an objective turn 1, where you wouldn't be able to normally, then that might be quite good. That might be worth it. So you can then just do a sort of regular move onto a point. But I think you have to look at it and be really careful with how you use it. So if it, if you're telegraphing it to your opponent too much and they can play around it, then you might be giving away your initiative, because they can then just go, well, I know you want to do that turn one, so you're going to dash your guy up to whoever it is. I'm then going to take initiative. I'm going to loot the point that was in the mid board that you thought you were going to be able to try and get to by using the dash. So just be careful with it, but that's something to look at. But there's there's a few other things that you can do with it. You can increase your threat ranges if you have the ability to charge on conceal or something like that. And it has some play, but it's probably the most situational of all of them. I think the standard scouting steps that I would see people taking is going to be fortify and infiltrate, and then I think you have to have a really good plan for that dash to make sure it's worthwhile, rather than just throwing it out there as something to do. I know there's people that will use pathfinders to try and get an insane grenade throw with the scouting phase dash combined with a recon sweep combined with a Monka move dash grenade, but I think that's probably the one to look at. I think that's going to cover off everything in scouting step, Connor.
I did have a question actually. So we've talked a lot about the utility that these abilities are bringing you, and I like all the points. But do you think there's also an element of I've deployed, my opponent's deployed, and my opponent, unfortunately, I spot it now, they've outsmarted me and they've got this really nasty alpha strike coming on. Can I now use my scouting step to try and remove that threat? So I don't know, maybe like the dash is going to take away that model that's put everyone within 2 inches of that blast so that they can't splash everyone, or can I put a barricade in to stop them moving the way they want to do it as a last-ditch effort? Do you think that ever comes into it, or can you be intelligent in your deployment and try and stop that?
I think there's always going to be some instances where that's going to happen, right? Like, so even if you're the best player in the world, I'm sure there's ways that your opponent can force you to make a real consideration about an alpha strike potential. So maybe the map layout is such that you're forced to bunch up all your guys and you're playing against Harad the Archon, and therefore, they've put someone right in the middle of the open, and they're going to yeet them across the board turn one using fleet and whatever else, and they're going to try and throw a torment grenade at you. Maybe that's the play. Yes, that is going to happen, and yes, I think you're right. How you solve it is using that scouting step effectively. So, I think you sort of touched on a point there, which is really useful actually. And we mentioned about route blocking with the barricades, and I think that's something to look at. Is like, okay, do I take a dice action where I use let's say an infiltrate option, I flip a guy on the edge of the cover and I shoot them before they do anything else, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. And if it doesn't work, well, I've lost the penalty now of it, and I'm going to lose models. Or do you just do the guaranteed action of is there somewhere where you can place a barricade down where that model paying that transverse penalty now can't achieve the range that they want to do? So, again, that's where you have that freedom of being able to do it anywhere in your territory. It is a huge amount of freedom to have. So I'm a massive fan of the new scouting step changes. I think it's really good for the game. It's really good for the health and the balance. And I think looking at that fortify option, not just as a sniper move, but as a way of route blocking, as a way of protecting objectives, as you say there, like an alpha strike denial tool as well, is a really good and a healthy way of looking at it as an option. So there's things there, and I think that's probably a good point to leave it on that, unless you had anything else that you think worth chucking in.
No, I think you've done a good job covering it there. Cheers.
Awesome stuff. So Connor, obviously we're getting more and more subscribers every day, which is absolutely awesome. And we're almost up to 450 now, which is so cool. If someone is listening to this and they think to themselves, that was really useful, like half-hour chat on the scouting step, and I got some tangible stuff that I can immediately apply to the table and hopefully improve my game, and they decide that they want to try and support us to keep doing this sort of content, is there any way that they could go about doing that?
Yeah, so the easiest thing to do is just to hit that like and subscribe button. So if we can get to 1,000 subscribers, that's the point where YouTube monetizes us, and that will help bring support into the podcast. But if you want to give us immediate support, then you could join our Patreon for as little as £3 a month, which gets us that mid-tournament packet of crisps and gets you early access to all of our videos, as well as some exclusive Patreon-only content, as well as FAQ Q&A style options that we can bring onto the podcast. Finally, I think we're in the process of getting a Element Games link set up, or it's already been set up. If you can use that link to purchase your Element Games goods, then we'll get support back from that too.
Absolutely nailed it. Appreciate that, Conor. That was a really concise way of saying how they could support us, which is really, really good. So just to summarise for anyone out there who doesn't have learning difficulties, you can go to our Patreon and support us on there. You can hit subscribe to help us get to 1,000 subscribers. And if you are buying miniatures already, or any paints or anything like that, you can use the affiliate link to Element Game, that's down in the description below to be able to go through that, and that'll give us a little bit of payback on all of your purchases, which is obviously helping us to do the podcast whilst it supports your hobby, which is the main thing. So thank you for that, Conor. We might have to do a little rehearsal again next time before we go into that again. You guys didn't see the take 2, 3, and 4 of that, which is great. So
I'm telling you, affiliate's too long a word. I don't know.
Affiliate's too long. It's real difficult. It's real hard to say. But there we go. Okay. I think that's covered off the scouting step. It's probably worth us touching on the tournament I went to as well, because it was a pretty good tournament, to be fair, up in Manchester. I went to King of the North at the weekend, which is the third time I've been up there now.
The aggressive northern meta.
The aggressive northern meta. But sadly, I didn't come back with gold. So I came back with silver, which, or I think they call it Chapter Master, was the actual award. So they had the Primarch was first place, Chapter Master was second place, and third place was, I want to say, Captain or something like that. So it was, and you got these like quite cool little trophies. So yeah, but I went up there obviously with Star Striders, was the team of the flavour of the week. So Blood of the week before, Star Striders this week. And I don't know who I'll take to the next tournament, but maybe some elite team. I don't know. We're sort of working our way through. We'll figure it out. But it was a 4-round tournament on a mixture of both Into the Dark and open board on a random table basis, using the new match play mission sequence and new tac ops. And what else was there that was special about it? It was using the Turning Point Tactics map pack for the open boards, which is pretty cool. So combine all those together, it was a really good event. I think they had 30-something players. It was quite a few. I mean, at one point, it was up to 36. It was more than 36. Then it went back down because people had to drop out. Then they had train strikes. Then it went up and down. So I think the guys had a pretty good turnout, bear in mind that I think everything was trying to go against them, because I think there was going to be a few more people from London turning up had the trains been running. But alas, train strikes. But that's a conversation for another day. Anyway, 4 rounds. I ended up playing Loot on round 1 against someone that I know quite well, actually. He's from the local gaming scene in Nottingham, called George, and he was bringing Vetguard, and we played Noctarius. So it was pretty amusing because he was giving me some trash talk, before the game, talking about how Nots is going to rival Turning Point Tactics and that sort of stuff. And I said, well, I'll see you in round 1. And lo and behold, pairings came up. And we got matched on round 1, so it was justice served immediately. And I managed to come away with a win with that 18-11. However, what did happen, and he did a really good job denying me reputation to maintain with Illusidia Vane on that. So I couldn't quite get the 12 damage because I killed quite a lot of very weak models, which wasn't helpful. And his leader was running around with the plasma pistol and power sword doing God's work, or the Imperium's work. So yeah, I dropped two points on tac ops, which is going to become quite important going forwards on that initial game. So then round 2, I went into the Dark, and I was playing Secure against Nicola or Nicola. I don't know how to pronounce it. Whatever I've done, I've probably said it wrong and gravely offended someone. So I hope I haven't. I'm really sorry. Let's go with Nick. So make sure I don't offend them anymore. But he was running in session, and they looked really cool. Actually, they were like a sort of like a space wolfy style in session with his like cool wolf helm look, and it was a really good looking team. But we're playing into the dark, and I find that matchup very challenging for Star Striders. So intercession are just so hard to kill, and combine that with the fact that you're not potentially going to get much shooting turn one is tough. But he came out really aggressive, and that is absolutely shocking to hear from Manchester City, because they're normally so slow and cautious, but this time randomly he was quite aggressive, which we never have predicted. So that actually gave me the opportunity to get off a turn one blast strike against two of his models. Now that did quite a lot of chip damage, but not enough to kill them, obviously. And then my rotary cannon managed to get an obscured shot and chip his Incessor again a little bit further. So he had one guy down to, I think it was 4 or 5 wounds remaining. Another guy, I think, on 8 or so, which was fine. So I done some damage, and then what I was able to do is when I got initiative on turn 2, so obviously I'd force him to go first on turn 1, or he elected to. I can't remember which round it was. And then I had that reroll in the bank if I needed it, but I managed to get initiative. And my Electromeister swung out, lethal 4, got a bunch of crits, did a bunch of mortal wounds, and toasted an Incessor right at the very beginning of turning point 2, whilst putting more mortal wounds, splash wounds on the guy next to him. So I did a lot of damage right at the end of turning point 1 into turning point 2, which really helped, I think, alleviate some of the stress that was going into that round. But following on from that, what I thought was then going to be like quite simple, he had some terrible dice, charging people with an Incessor, only getting a couple of hits and that sort of thing, which was a bit of a shame because I think it sort of skewed the result a little bit going forwards. But we ended up in a scenario where he had to sort of make a choice between moving into the centre room to score his own tac ops because he had secure central line. I think it was like central control or something else, or maybe might hold them back. So he had to either move into central room and score that and try and deny me, or he could hang around on the side flank and deny me my recover item, which he elected to do, which then meant that he wasn't able to get me off the primary, so I was outscoring on primaries. I was outscored him on secondaries, bar 2 points on that recover item because he had, I think, 2 Incessors parked on it on turn 1, and they basically stayed there until the end of the game, or there was one left in the end. So I ended that game on 18-14, which is obviously quite a close game because he had the secure hatchway, I think, which he did manage to score. But yeah, it was quite interesting, and yeah, I'm trying to think how I could have played it better. I think where I chose to place the recover item was quite really difficult. So in hindsight, I probably should have put that in a more central location to allow easier access. And this is kind of the point of me switching between teams quite a lot, is that I'm realizing that I'm learning quite a lot as the day goes on. So that was like the first 2 games I was dropping points where I probably should have been getting them, and then towards the end of the day I was sort of unlocking more like the true power of Star Strider, so to speak. So into round 3 we were playing capture, and I was against Luke, who I've played a couple of times now, and he's great fun to play, and he was running Vet Guard, and as per standard he came out swinging, repping that northern meta hard, and giving a lot of his guys hatchets as well, which again caught me off guard a little bit because no one sees Vet Guard coming at you with hatchets as a thing, but they came at me with hatchets, and so he was like double stacking them on doors and making it so that with a double guard, if I tried to get in amongst it, he would be right in there in my face and giving it me with some melee. So that was pretty interesting. So we went through that. And I think the team just sort of ran out of steam a little bit midway through. I was quite efficiently killing his models, and I think just towards the end he just ran out of the the ability to contest me. And I think maybe it might have been a little bit of threat ranging positioning on the end of turn 2 and into turn 3. Had he had a slightly better threat ranging, it would have been better for him. But he didn't. So he ran out of steam, and I was able to then sort of steamroll at the end and swing it quite heavily in my favour. So it went up to 2011. So I managed to max on that one. That then put me into the final round against Ben, my teammate, which is the sort of the traditional matching we have is in the final round. We'll get matched up, and he was running his Hand of the Archon, and we were playing on Chalnath this time. So I hadn't played against Hand of the Archon before, so I was a little bit dubious as to I'm not really too sure what works against these guys, what doesn't work against these guys. There's a whole bunch of tips and tricks that they can do, but the one thing I'd say about them is they can do loads of crits, but against a team like Starstriders, where you can halve damage from a single hit, a lot of the time that the crits themselves can get sort of like mitigated. So, you might end up with sort of a hit and 2 crits, but it was never quite enough. You'd save one maybe, and the other 2 would go through, but you'd halve one, and you'd only end up taking, say, 6 damage, and your guy's still alive. Or, he really struggled to kill my Voidmaster. I felt really bad about it because I kept rolling hot on my saves. He kept rolling poorly on his attack dice. And I think he fired the blast pistol into me and got, I want to say, 2 hits. And I saved my 4-up save on him because I paid for the armor, which then was going to be 4 damage, which I then halved to 2 damage. And so his leader shot one of his, you would think, most powerful weapons and did 2 damage. And I hadn't even used the ignore damage once ploy. So anyway, that was pretty brutal. And it was one of those things where the assets in that game were just providing constant, mental load on Ben to be thinking about where are these angles, where can he be struck from, is it safe to put a guy next to this window? Actually, no, because you can get shot from this side, etc., etc. Thinking about the grouping out for the blast and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's their real strength, because against a good player, there's so much to think about constantly. You can get caught out by small things, and I was able to do that and secure a win. So that ended up being 2018 to me, picking up the wins at the end. So that worked out all right. And that was kind of like the 4 games, and it was good.
2018 that's a very close game. Was it? Did it feel tense and tight like it was against Mark as well?
It was interesting. It felt more comfortably. So there was a point where because in my head I knew I was down on tac ops over the tournament. I was like, I have to just focus on scoring tac ops. And I sort of did some really safe moves to guarantee tac ops, which I knew was going to let the primaries go up and let Ben score more. But at that point I thought I'd won. So I was like, the only way that I can win the tournament is to effectively max tac ops and hope that, someone like Dan who wins the tournament drops a bunch of tac ops this game. So that was the only hope that I had, which was unlikely, but still to the point where I was like, well, if I can do that, then it works. So it wasn't in the game against Mark, I thought I'd lost. It didn't feel that. It felt like I'd won, and I was just cognitively allowing the points to get closer and closer, but not letting it get too far. But it was still, it is one of those things where you finish the game and you think to yourself, oh God, it's like 2018. Oh, that was even closer than I thought it was going to be. Maybe I shouldn't, because had he got a few more primaries or denied me a few points at the end there, then it could have swung the other way. And that is the sort of the issue with these high scoring games. So denial of VP is pretty significant. There is one thing that I do want to talk about though that came up on both of my Into the Dark games. Actually, no, that's not true. It came up on my first game on Octarius, an open board, and it came up on Into the Dark on my third game, both against Vet Guard. But anyway, and it's really important because it's a core rule that I think often gets overlooked, but actually is quite useful. And that's the ability to move through engagement range of an enemy. So normally, you can't move through an engagement range of an enemy unless you charge that enemy. There is an exception though, which is if you have a friendly already in engagement range with that enemy, you can then move through. You just can't end within it. So in game 1, I used my dog to tie up a model, and then use my other model to move through and loot a point behind the dog. And I wouldn't be able to do that normally because they would have been engagement range, but that let me do that. And same was on game 3. I did the same thing but into the dark. So that's a point where I think people just need to remember in the core rules you can move through that engagement range if you tie them up with a model first. So you got to imagine that you've got someone that's pinning them down whilst the other person gets through to the objective, and that's a really important thing. So core rule, big lesson to take out from that. Don't forget that as a rule, and use it where you can to be able to get yourself some extra points where you need to.
I like I wasn't there. I'm hearing you talk about it, but I like the fact that this was a mixed board tournament, mixture between open board and into the dark. How did that feel playing it? Did it make you? What did that impact your kill team selection before you even began the first game? Like which army do I take now?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to effectively plan for both at the same time, because it's also because it was random, if that makes sense. So because you didn't know which round it was going to be, you didn't know if you could. I'm sure there was someone. There might not have been. But there might have been someone there who had 4 games on open board, and there might have been someone there who had 4 games on Into the Dark. And if you brought the wrong team for it, that could sting you potentially. So I think maybe that's somewhere in future where you select rounds and you go, no, that's not true. So the reason why you do that is because if you're trying to get together, let's say, I forget how many it was, 15 or more, 16, 18, 20 boards of competitive kill team terrain, that's really hard to do, right? Like, say, getting all that together that's painted, that's of a high quality, with good map packs and all that sort of stuff, that's a big ask. So they get everyone from the community to bring in various boards to be able to set these up and build them. So you end up sort of like doing it because out of requirement. Now, what I think is the most competitive way to play it, I think the most competitive is to have personally only open or only into the dark, or have like a split break where it's like first 2 rounds are open, second 2 are into the dark, something like that. That's the most competitive, sure, but realistically, working within what you have, it's much easier to source both a mixture of boards. So that's kind of why they've done it. And I know some people are a fan of it, some people aren't, but that's irrelevant, right? As competitive players, we have to look at it and go, right, okay, that is the map pack that's been given to you, the mission set that's been given to you. How do you work with that and make it work for you? So yeah, kill team selection step. Great point. I think had I thought about it a bit more before I went, I probably would have taken my Blooded to that event and taken the Star Striders to the event before, or mixed it up like in that way, because I think Blooded do really well on those mixed board formats because they can perform quite well in both environments. Elites perform quite well in both environments as well, I find. I'm not sure Star Striders are the best on Into the Dark. They've got some play there, but a lot of it can be quite situational and difficult. And the assets can be quite hard to shoot or to find the angles that you would normally get because of the way the boards are. The firing lanes are narrowed down anyway, so that the benefit you would have of sort of like spreading your guys out all over the place to have so many different angles that people have to compute is sort of taken away, and you just sort of get funnels instead. And it's like, well, you can get one here or one here or one here. So I think that their strength is an open board. Personally, don't get me wrong, I think they're good on Into the Dark and they can perform. And clearly, I won both games on it, so it's not like they're in a bad place there or anything like that. But I think that's where they're a little bit weaker in comparison to say other teams. So yeah, kill team selection step. Probably if I thought a little bit more about it, I would have taken a different team. However, I'm trying to do this, different team to every tournament vibe, and trying to broaden myself as a gamer, and it's probably what's costing me top spots, to be fair, because in game 1 and game 2, I think to be honest, if I'm honest with myself, familiarity with the faction cost me, and familiarity with their tac ops cost me. And had I been more familiar with those, I probably would have been okay, but I hadn't been practicing enough. So I think that's probably why Dan rightfully won and I didn't, because I didn't get myself in the right position ahead of time. That's going to be something that's going to happen, right? If I'm not committing to a certain faction. So yeah, I think that's that's one lesson. And then the next lesson would be, it really affects your tac ops, And I haven't played enough on Into the Dark. I've played a lot of open board, but I haven't played enough on Into the Dark, and it does affect the game, and it is a very different game. So you have to have really a plan for both, and you can't just go into it with I always take these objectives, and therefore I'll take these same ones over and over again, because it just won't work that way. So yeah, it was good. It definitely added a challenge that was something for me to think about. I was real nervous going round 2 in session Into Dark, because he was running rapid methodical or durable, rapid methodical. So that is a real problem child to deal with when they can overwatch on 3s and or guard on 3s and that sort of stuff, and they've got the rerolls and everything else. So yeah, it was good, and it definitely kept me working throughout the day, kept my brain spinning, and ended up with a really fun tournament. And again, like, I know I say this every time, I'm like a stuck record, but just how good the competitive scene is up in Manchester. But they had, like, every round they had these, like, challenges people would want to try and get, where they're trying make sure you get the first kill, the first leader kill, whatever it is, and everyone's like got these, like, secondary objectives they're trying to do, and everyone's super friendly, and the facility's great as well. The Element Games Northwest Gaming Centre is a big venue with plenty of space. The staff are all really friendly, and Dan and Ben do a fantastic job, like, hosting and TOing. So I really can't give any criticism to the event in that way at all, because everyone that's been to one has said it's fantastic. They would go again. In fact, I spoke to the Barton clan, so Dan and Guy, and they were like, yeah, it was really good, and they're recommending it to all the London players. So I think, if we can get one where the trains don't cancel, you might see like a 64 player plus event up there in future, which is awesome, because it really is really good. So yeah, we'll see. But I think, yeah, to answer your question in the longest rambling 10 minutes ever, Connor, yeah, it was good. It added a challenge. The reason that you do it is for the difficulty of organisation for the tournament, vice, say, a pure competitive tactical reason.
That's so interesting, because it's like a happy little accident. I get what you're saying when you did it, but just from my knee-jerk reaction from hearing it, it makes for a more competitive environment. You've now got to select a kill team that works on both environments, and even then, when you discuss it, intercessors, which chapter tactics do I take? Because some are great on open board, some are great on Into the Dark, but they're not both. So do I have to pay a CP when I want to chop and change between the two? It's just adding an extra dimension to the competitive environment, and it just sounds really fun.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is really good fun. And, like, there is Into Dark, it can be quite chaotic. I think it's somewhat divisive as a community. Some people love it, some people hate it. I think it's easier, and I guess that's the thing, isn't it? Like, because it is adding a bit more cognitive load. I know there's a lot of people, for instance, that don't want to do 4 rounds; they prefer 3 rounds. So the chopping and changing and making it harder for them, for those sort of casual gamers that just want to turn up, roll a few dice and leave. They might go, I'm not sure if I like it or not. But you're right. I think for the higher levels, it's definitely adding something which is pretty cool. Okay, awesome stuff. So that covered off my weekend in a long ramble, but long story short, great weekend. Starstriders OP, managed to come second, but dropped some points through my own misplays. And Dan, the rightful winner with his Imperial Navy breaches, got the golden ticket, which is awesome stuff. So that's all cool things. So we go into a question from the patrons, Connor, if we got time.
Yeah, let's do it. We've got a really good question here today, actually, about analysis paralysis, and I think it's so good we might have to do a whole episode on it, but I'll ask it and then you get your thoughts. Analysis paralysis. How do you avoid it when you have 2 or more valuable targets? So, for example, how do you make a quick decision between killing, say, a plasma gunner or a comms guy handing out 2 APL per turn where they can secure TAC ops or objective VPs? How do you weigh that potential value of utility operatives against something scary like AP2?
Yeah, this is a absolutely fantastic question, and I think right off the bat you hit the nail on the head. We're going to have to do a full episode on this, because there is so much to talk about in analysis paralysis and all the various options and etc. etc. So I think it's, to do it justice, we're going to have to do a full episode. I'm not going to try and squeeze it in just to one of these, but I think at the same time, I want to try and give a few things that's going to help, hopefully straight away, before we then cover it in detail again in future. So let's look at a sort of the specific example that's been given there. So there's two examples. Like one is you have a plasma gunner as a valid target, and then you have a comms model as a valid target. And which one are you gonna choose to kill? So firstly, to set the scene, you have to know which turning point it is, right? So we're going to talk about how you do risk management throughout the game and that kind of stuff. But if this is turning point one, the way that I'm looking at those two things is, okay, well that guy with that plasma gun could potentially be killing 4 of my models, and that could potentially then mean that I'm going to lose however many VP, and as a result, that's a higher priority model to kill. However, conversely, let's say it's turning point 4, and the only way that they can score the VP that they need to win is to hand out a comms buff, an APL buff, to a model that's within range, and then be able to give that model the movement it needs to be able to capture an objective. Well, suddenly that's completely changed. So what I'm doing there is I'm purely looking at the win condition when I'm looking at these points, and it might be that I say, okay, what does killing this guy give me from a VP differential point of view, right? So is it is the person you're going to kill their rob and ransack target? Is it their executioner? Is it your eliminate guard? All that sort of stuff. And how can you stack those VPs? And I basically just try to look at, on the most simplest level, like what's the points differential? Is killing him costing me 1 VP and gaining them 1? Is it gaining me 5 and losing them 2? And then I look at it purely on that and go, right, well, the end result there is 3 points difference, and I'm up by 3 points. And if that's what I need to win, then that's what I need, right? So that's kind of like how I go through it and try and figure it out. Because at the end of the day, the game is all about VP. And at the most simplistic level, that's what I'm trying to look at when it comes to analysis paralysis. So which is going to give you the most amount of points in that instance, or stop you from being denied the most amount of points as the game progresses, and then go from there. But there is a whole load more stuff that we need to talk about when we talk about this. Like, so we talked about what turning point is it, what is the probability of it happening, what's the unintended side effects of you doing that, all that sort of stuff. But we'll talk about that in another episode, because we could talk probably for another hour on that alone, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And even then, when you were speaking, then I was thinking about, has one of them activated and the other one not activated? What's the, like you said, the percentage chance of killing one model over the other? There's just so many variables going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. And even like, say, because another one there, going back to activation advantage on turn 1, if you're killing a model that's not yet activated, maybe that's going to give you the activation advantage that you need. So maybe by killing the comms, that's going to give you the ability to move a guy onto an objective, and the plasma gun can't shoot him because it's your last activation, and therefore the threat of the plasma has been mitigated because you never got to shoot anyway. So yeah, that's a really good question. We'll capture that again, and we're going to make sure we do that in a deep dive at some point in the future, because it's definitely worth touching on in far more detail. Okay, I think it's probably worth kind of just rounding off on a tactical tip for the episode, because we didn't do one last week, and it's probably worth us just getting one now. What do you think?
Let's squeeze it in. I think we've got time. Let's do it.
All right, sweet. So the one that I'm going to talk about today is non-reciprocal shooting, and I don't want to go too much into the most core mechanics of it when it comes to obscurity, because that is well. Okay, Connor. Like, I'm going to ask you, when I'm talking about non-reciprocal shooting, what comes to mind?
Immediately, I'm thinking about using obscuring terrain to allow me to shoot a model without that model being able to shoot me.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is the most generic form of non-reciprocal shooting. But what I wanted to give from a tactical tip is the fact that there is many, many ways to achieve the same outcome. And I just want to go through a few of them now, because that is the most basic method, is using obscurity to make sure that only one model can shoot, and then the other model can't shoot back. And against a team like, say, Intercession, with their ability to shoot on death, that is probably the most important method of being able to do so, right? So that's one way. But there's a few other ways. I want to caveat them now. So there's the pseudo elite method or the elite method. So that's where you move out, do your shot, and then use the dash ability to then get back into either concealment or visibility, out of visibility or out of line of sight, wherever it is. So it might be that by having 3 APL, you can then use that so you can't then be shot on the return fire. And you might be able to achieve that through either an APL buff, a special ability like a free dash, or potentially just by being 3 APL as always. The other way that this can look, which people will hear referred to probably, is like pop tarting. So the idea of something coming out of the top of a toaster and then going back into the toaster to be hidden away, is on the edge of a vantage point. Potentially, you can move up, leave your base with a slight overhang over the back of it, take your shot, and then with that third APL, move back down behind the barricade with a dash, and suddenly no return fire can come at you. And that's another valid way for elites to be able to get those shots off without being shot in return. This can be gone further when you go and look at doorways on maps like Octarius and Chalnath and that sort of thing. So you might be able to move through a door, shoot, and then dash back through the door that you just went through. So those are sort of 3 ways. You can use the edge of a building, you can use a vantage point, or you can use a doorway to be able to go the way through. Into the dark, same can be done with hatches, right? So maybe you're at a hatch and you're on conceal in heavy cover. You activate, you flip to engage, you shoot someone, your second action, you close the hatch, and bam, right, that's it, right there. You've stopped that visibility, away you go, and you're no longer being shot at. So that's a few ways of using your APL manipulation to be able to get those shots off around doorways, pop tarting on vantage, or using the edge of cover. There's a few other ways as well, which is quite interesting, which I'll cover as well. So there's another one which is one-way visibility. So this can be where if you have someone that's, let's say, pointing a gun out around the corner of a wall and something like that, you have to remember that for your opponent to shoot you, they still have to draw visibility with their head. So if you can move your model in a way where the head of your model can see their model, let's say it's their arm or whatever, or their gun, or whatever's sticking out, so you can draw a shot on them, but from their head, they draw back and they can't see any part of your model. Well, you could be potentially within 2 inches and getting a shot, which is it's only one-way visibility, and they can't then shoot you back with non-reciprocal shooting, because even though you're not obscured, you're not visible, and that's the key thing. So that could be another way where you can potentially get those one-way shots. The next one I would go for is a charge block. So let's say you have a model, you flip to engage, you shoot someone, and they haven't died, but they're potentially going to then shoot you back. Well, the next option is you just charge them. So if they're within range for you to charge, you can move out into engagement range with them, tie them up, and then they can't shoot in combat. So then they have to fall back, which might cost them 2 APL, which on a guard figure might mean that they're no longer able to kill you, or they have to fight you. And if they don't kill you in fighting, then they're not going to be able to get away with it, or they might lose their ability to shoot twice or that sort of thing as well. So that's a really important way of being able to just tie up a model, reduce their APL ability, and reduce their ability to get those shots off. Another one, which is like really, really simple, is just silent weapons. Silent weapons are non-reciprocal method of shooting. If you're on conceal and you're doing your engagement, then you're going to be able to get those shots without taking the fire back. Another one might be if you have the ability to change an order. So some models have the ability to change it during their activation, and you could potentially use that to be able to shoot someone, change your order back to conceal, and then you're good to go. And that's, again, another method of non-reciprocal shooting. Finally, the one that's potentially the most tactically impactful is the last first, right? So if your last activation is going to be move out, shoot someone, well then at the start of your next activation of the next turn, you can then either shoot again and move behind visibility or obscurity, or you can conceal yourself and move somewhere else so you don't get shot. So that can be another way of doing it. If your opponent doesn't have the opportunity to shoot you at the end of the turning point, then you can do it that way as well. And you might be able to combine that potentially with a strategic phase ability. So you might have a strategic phase ability to change that order going forwards, or use strategic phase movement to be able to move back as well. So the classic example would be an iron rifle swinging out with pathfinders, recon sweep back into cover, or a crew being able to use Is it Fast Stalk Connor or something like their
Fast
strategic one?
stalkers, yeah. Warp
Yeah,
Coven have got a similar thing as well.
yeah. Warp Coven had the ability to do it during their activation with a tactical ploy, the Capricious Plan, whatever it is. All those sorts of things, right? So if you have that ability, then flip your order back, boom, before your opponent gets a chance to shoot, you're back on conceal and you're hidden away. So when we talk about non-reciprocal shooting, I think it's great to understand the core mechanics of using obscurity to avoid those shots, but also thinking about all those other methods that you can layer up one after the other to be able to avoid those shots as well. Because there's a whole bunch of ways of doing it, and I think it would be remiss of us just to think about it just purely from a obscurity point of view. So I think that's hopefully a useful tactical tip is when you're doing non-reciprocal shooting, use all of the options that are available to you, not just the use of obscurity. Any thoughts on that, Connor?
Outside of RBTs and Pathfinders, are there any other teams that can shoot into combat as well? Just think about when you said time up in combat.
There is a few. So I know Blooded can do it as well, but they have a chance that they'll hit their own teammate. There is Corsairs. Their Pistolero can shoot in engagement range, so he could potentially charge you and shoot. I'm trying to think if there's any others. I'm sure there will be, but there's a few, but there's not loads. So it might not work for everyone, and make sure you double check with your opponent before you start yeeting models into close combat for them just to be shot by someone else, I guess. But yeah, good point.
It's also a good, interesting way. Then it's a good way to stop Overwatch, which is a way someone can shoot back at you because they're not able to fall back at that point because they've already activated.
Absolutely, yeah. Throwing models that have charging into models that have already activated as a way of hiding your guys is fantastic, and it can really slow down an enemy that's trying to get stuff done. And you can use it at the end of a turn. Just I've shot with this guy, done what he wants to do, yeet him into two models, and suddenly they're tied up next turn as they have to fall back and they're wasting their APL, which can be really useful. I think, unless there's anything else you wanted to add, Connor, that might bring us to the end.
No, but I was wondering if people feel I missed out on Dan and Ben's tournament here and want to get involved in the next one. Has they got one coming up?
They absolutely do. There's one coming up in May. Let me double check the dates of that, and we'll in the next episode get those up because I think it's worth sharing. In fact, I'll try and put them in the description if we can as well. But yeah, because there's a whole bunch of tournaments coming up for the Manchester guys. There's Warhammer Fest that's coming up just around the corner at the beginning of May, and I think it's mid-May. I want to say it's like the 14th-ish or something like that is where it is their next one, but I can't remember exactly, so I don't want to give people false information. But if you want to go on it, and you want to go to one of these tournaments and want to get amongst it, which I highly recommend, then get on Discord, find really great name at D's Nuts, find that user, hit him up, or go into the tournaments page on like Andy's Discord and Glass Half Dead and have a look and see what's there, because it will definitely be advertised and highly worth going to, I think. Okay, awesome. So that's going to bring us to the end of this episode. Hopefully you found something new or useful whilst listening. If you did, throwing us a like would be greatly appreciated. If you want to make sure you don't miss any episodes, make sure you click that subscribe button, helping us get to those 1,000 subscribers, and you'll get a notification as soon as the next episode drops as well. And that really is one of the best ways to help support a small channel like ours. If you can't wait and you do want early access to all of this sort of good stuff, we have a Patreon where you get exclusive access to all this content ahead of time, and you also get bespoke Q&A where you can ask the questions and we'll answer them live on the podcast for you every week. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback, so drop a comment below and we'll get right to you. Thank you so much for listening. I'm your host, Ryan. This has been Turning Point Tactics, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.